You know, he wins at SOPA a year after he's arrested. It's not unambiguously happy moments. There's a lot going on.
He's so attuned towards participating in the political process, you can't stop him.
The list of organizations Swartz founded or co-founded is enormous. And years before Edward Snowden would expose widespread internet surveillance, Swartz was already concerned.
It is shocking to think that the accountability is so lax that they don't even have sort of basic statistics about how big the spying program is. And if the answer is, oh, we're spying on so many people we can't possibly even count them, then that's an awful lot of people, right? It would be one thing if they said, look, you know, we know the number of telephones we're spying on, we don't know exactly how many real people that corresponds to, but they just came back and said, we can't give you a number at all. That's pretty, I mean, it's scary is what it is.
Well, that's scary.
You know, they put incredible pressure on him, took away his, you know, all of the money he had made. They, you know, threatened to take away his physical freedom. Why'd they do it, you know? I mean, well, why are they going after whistleblowers, you know? Why are they going after people who tell the, you know, who tell the truth about all sorts of things? I mean, from the banks to the, you know, to war, to just sort of government transparency.
So secrecy serves those who are already in power. And we are living in an era of secrecy that coincides with an era where the government is doing also a lot of things that are probably illegal and unconstitutional. So those two things are not coincidences.
It's very clear that this technology has been developed not for small countries overseas, but right here for use in the United States by the U.S. government. The problem with the spying program is it's this sort of long, slow expansion, you know, going back to the Nixon administration, right? Obviously, it became big after 9/11 under George W. Bush, and Obama has continued to expand it, and the problems have slowly grown worse and worse. But there's never been this moment you can point to, say, okay, we need to galvanize opposition today because today is when it matters. Instead, it's mattered for.
The prosecution, in my estimation, of Aaron Swartz was about sending a particular laser-like message to a group of people that the Obama administration sees as politically threatening. And that is essentially the hacker, the information, and the democracy activist community. And the message that the Obama administration wanted to send to that particular community was, in my estimation, we know you have the ability to make trouble for the establishment. And so we are going to try to make an example out of Aaron Swartz to scare as many of you as possible into not making that trouble.
And the government said, oh, the legal opinions we're using to legalize the spying program are also classified. So we can't even tell you which laws we're using to spy on you. You know, every time they can say, oh, this is another instance of cyber war, the cyber criminals are attacking us again, we're all in danger, we're all under threat. They use those as excuses to push through more and more dangerous laws.
Great. And so just to follow that up, like personally, how do you feel the fight is going, I guess?
It's up to you.
I know, but we gotta like, you know.
You know, there's sort of these two polarizing perspectives, right? Everything is great. The internet has created all this freedom and liberty and everything's gonna be fantastic. Or everything is terrible. The internet has created all these tools for cracking down and spying and, you know, controlling what we say. And I think both are true, right? The internet has done both. And both are kind of amazing and astonishing. And which one will win out in the long run is up to us. It doesn't make sense to say, oh, one is doing better than the other. You know, they're both true. And it's up to us which ones we emphasize and which ones we take advantage of, because they're both there and they're both always going to be there.
On September 12, 2012, federal prosecutors filed a superseding indictment against Swartz, adding additional counts of wire fraud, unauthorized access to a computer, and computer fraud. Now, instead of 4 felony counts, Swartz was facing 13. The prosecution's leverage had dramatically increased, as did Swartz's potential jail time and fines.
They filed a separate indictment to add more charges, and they had a theory about why this conduct constituted a number of federal crimes, and that a very significant sentence could attach to it under the law.
That theory, and much of the prosecution's case against Swartz, involved a law created originally in 1986. It is called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was inspired by the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, which is a great movie.
I have you now.
In this movie, a kid gets the ability through the magic of computer networks to like launch a nuclear attack. Now, that's not actually possible, and it certainly wasn't possible in the 80s, but apparently this movie scared Congress enough to pass the original Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
This is a law that's just behind the times. For example, that penalizes terms of service kinds of arrangements. You can have something like eHarmony or Match.com, and somebody sort of inflates their own personal characteristics, and all of a sudden, depending on the jurisdiction and the prosecutors, they could be in a whole host of troubles.
We all know what terms of use are. Most people don't read them, but not abiding by their terms could mean you are committing a felony.
The website terms of service often say things like, be nice to each other, or don't do anything that's improper. The idea that the criminal law has anything to say about these kinds of violations, I think strikes most people as crazy.
The examples get even more crazy. Until it was changed in March of 2013, the terms of use on the website of Hearst's 17 magazine said you had to be 18 in order to read it.
I would say that the way the CFA has been interpreted by the Justice Department, we are probably all breaking the law.
Vague and prone to misuse, the CFAA has become a one-size-fits-all hammer for a wide range of computer-related disputes. Though not the only factor in his case, 11 of the 13 charges against Swartz involved the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The question why hangs over much of the story of Aaron Swartz. Just what was motivating the government, and what would their case have been? The Department of Justice declined requests for answers, but Professor Aaron Kerr is a former prosecutor who has studied the case.
So I think I come about this case from a different direction than other people on a number of reasons. I was a federal prosecutor at the Justice Department for 3 years before I started teaching. The government came forward with an indictment based on what crimes they thought were committed, just as a purely lawyers matter, looking at the precedents, looking at the statute, looking at the history, looking at the cases that are out there so far. I think it was a fair indictment based on that. You can debate whether they should have charged this case. There's just a lot of disagreement. Some people are on the open access side, some people are not. I think the government took Swartz's guerrilla open access manifesto very seriously. And I think they saw him as somebody who was committed as a moral imperative to breaking the law to overcome a law that Swartz saw as unjust. And in a democracy, if you think a law is unjust, there are ways of changing that law. There's going to Congress, as Swartz did so masterfully with SOPA. Or you can violate that law in a way to try to nullify that law. And I think what was driving the prosecution was the sense that Swartz was committed not just to breaking the law, but to really making sure that law was nullified, that everyone would have access to the database in a way that you couldn't put the toothpaste back into the tube. It would be done, and Swartz's side would win. There's a big disagreement in society as to whether that is an unjust law, and ultimately that's a decision for the American people to make, working through Congress. And then the second problem is, I think, we're still trying to figure out what's the line between less serious offenses and more serious offenses. We're now entering this different environment of computers and computer misuse, and we don't yet have a really strong sense of exactly what these lines are. So we're just working that out.
This is a poor use of prosecutorial discretion. The hammer that the Justice Department has to scare people with it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so most people just, you can't roll the dice with your life like that.
Should we tap somebody's phone? Should we film them? Should we turn somebody and get them to testify against these other people? That's how federal agents and prosecutors think. They build cases, they make cases.
Swartz was caught in the gears of a brutal criminal justice system that could not turn back, a machine that has made America the country with the highest rate of incarceration in the world.
We have in this country allowed ourselves to be captured by the politics of fear and anger, and anything we're afraid of, like the future of the internet and access, and anything we're angry about instinctively creates a criminal justice intervention. And we've used jail, prison, and punishment to resolve a whole host of problems that historically were never seen as criminal justice problems. The impulse to threaten, indict, prosecute, which is part of what has created this debate and controversy over online access and information on the internet, is very consistent with what we've seen in other areas. The one difference is that the people who are usually targeted and victimized by these kinds of criminal and carceral responses are typically poor and minority.
Swartz's isolation from friends and family increased.
He had basically stopped working on anything else, and the case was, in fact, like taking over sort of his whole life.
One of Aaron's lawyers apparently told the prosecutors that he was emotionally vulnerable and that was something that they really needed to keep in mind so that they knew that.
It was weighing on him very heavily. He did not like having his actions and his movements restricted in any way. And the threat of jail, which they pounded him with a lot, was terrifying to him.
Completely exhausted his financial resources, and it cost us a lot of money also, and he raised a substantial amount of money. So it was, it was in the millions of dollars.
The legal defense?
Yes.
Was in millions?
Yes.
Yeah, I think he didn't want to be a burden to people. I think that was a factor. Like, I have my normal life, and then I have this shitty thing I have to deal with. And I try to keep the two of them as separate as possible. But they were just beginning to blur together, and everything was becoming shitty.
Swartz faced a tough choice that was only getting tougher. Do you admit guilt and move on with your life, or do you fight a broken system? With his legal case, the answer was simple. He rejects the final plea deal, and a trial date is set.
Aaron was resolute that he didn't want to knuckle under and accept something that he didn't believe was fair, but I also think he was scared.